Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Life Inner Show. I'm your host, Jason Wojo. On the Life Inner Show, we help people make more, work less, and live better. I am joined by my illustrious co-host, Polish Peter.
Ooh, illustrious. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to have to probably look up that word.
I think I called you illustrious before, man. You should have looked it up already.
Yeah, I know.
And
I'll look it up.
Speaking of illustrious, man, your hair looks a little different today. What's going on there?
Do you like it?
I do like it.
All right.
You know, it pains me to say this, but it looks pretty good.
Exactly. Well, you can give credit to my awesome wife.
What can she do for me, man? I mean, like,
you're a lost cause, though. That's not going to happen.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Forget it, man. It's just,
well,
I wouldn't even talk about
it. So Peter is here with his illustrious hair today, and we are doing an interview with Jodi Howe, who runs a podcast dealing with anxiety and overcoming anxiety, especially in particular from a spiritual angle, as well as real life things. I think you're gonna really enjoy this episode, man. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that's important for a lot of people. You know, I mean, that we when we coach here in Life on Air, when we go to the 3-day getaway events, we have conversations about. There's people who have anxiety, so I think it's an important subject to talk about. And I love how she has used the way she's created it for herself, to God, and ourselves, how we can manage this and make this work.
Yeah, let's jump in right now, man. I'm super excited to get into this topic. It's super relevant, especially in today's world. Here we go. Hey, Jodi, what's up? Welcome to Life Inner Show.
Jason, how are you? So nice to see you guys here.
Yes, I'm so excited.
On the virtual world.
Yeah, so Peter, I know Jodi. I met Jodi through our church that we go to together, Hope Community Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she's a worship singer. She's a vocalist. And we were talking one day, and she has a podcast herself, which is pretty astounding. And I wanted to kind of learn from her. And I think, by the way, it's a great message. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but I kind of, based on, so just describe to us, Jodi, a little bit, like what encouraged you to start a podcast, and why is it, we talked about this before, but you have a very specific message, and it feels and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like it's for women in particular that you really that's your audience. But like, why, I'm so curious. What is the message that you're sharing with people, and why did you feel called to share this?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so happy to share that to you guys as well and your audience. It's interesting. It's so funny. I don't know if I necessarily gravitate 100% towards women. I know that is a larger part of my audience, but it surprises me when men will private message me and say, "Hey, that podcast really helped me through so and so." So yeah, I mean, it's my peer group is definitely women, but I liked, that's why I wanted to say my title, "The Air That I Breathe," was about helping people understand that anxiety is real, but you can, work through the healing process through practical measures and tips and all those things that you can apply to your, what you can possibly do on this earth, and then let God lead the rest of it. And so, I didn't want to say women encouraging women or anything like that, because guys, I think can, certainly benefit a lot from that. So it was about 10 some odd years ago that I discovered that anxiety was truly a problem in my life, not to the point where it was going to drastically take it, but it was drastically changing it. I was waking up day after day in my late 30s, realizing that, I can't deal with all of the stress that's going on in life. And it wasn't like significant stress. It was just general stress. And long story short, because it truly is my testimony, that I realized that I absolutely had to address it. As I looked back in the course of my life on this earth, there was times where it happened, where my first anxiety attack happened in my during my college graduation. I was walking through it. I didn't know what anxiety was. In those days, no one was talking about mental illness. They weren't talking about the mental struggles that happen in people's lives. The things that you would hear about with anxiety, depression, and all that would be extreme circumstances, but never a general thing that people would experience. So I walked through my college graduation having my first panic attack, not knowing what was happening to my life. And it ended up being that I spent my whole graduation experience in the medic room, and I missed out on the whole, experience that I lived and worked 4 years to achieve. And then, I went into the medical room, they decided that, yes, in fact, it was an anxiety attack. There wasn't anything physically really going wrong. And then years later, these episodes would come into my life and I didn't quite understand them. And again, we weren't talking about them in those times. We're talking 90s in the early part of this new century. But then eventually, as my late 30s, started to creep up on me, the fear of turning 40 and my children, I was done with the childbearing years, but I was starting to realize that, I was using substances to calm that anxiety that I didn't really know was a problem. And then eventually it just hit me like a ton of bricks and I knew I had to address it. So by the grace of God, even though I hit a low point of that anxiety, he sent me to a friend of mine through the advice, the wisdom of my mother. And I just want to clarify something really important. I was not a believer. I was not walking with Christ. I was raised Catholic. And so I considered myself a Creaster. I showed up to Easter and Christmas services, but that was about it in terms of my faith. I knew who God was. I was not atheist nor agnostic, but I didn't have that relationship with Christ. And it was that moment that my mother said, you need to go meet with a friend who was a Christian. And through prayer and conversation, I started attending a Bible study and I learned a lot about what this anxiety was. I addressed it with my physicians. And from there on, I started this leap of faith into a walk with Christ. So as I started that leap of faith, Jason and Peter, I realized that there are things that I can do on this earth to actually combat this anxiety, but the rest goes to God. In other words, I wasn't eating correctly all the time. I wasn't taking care of my body. I wasn't managing my calendar. So many things that instigate anxiety. Yes, in fact, I do have a general anxiety disorder, and that's alongside of a panic disorder. But there is actually things that I could have been doing better to limit and heal through that anxiety. So it was like God worked through this process of, I'm going to step into your life. You're going to want to walk with me through it because you're going to see the incredible glory and grace that I can give you. But I need you to start, implementing these practical measures. And so by doing that, we met in the middle and he has led me into this incredible journey. The podcasting journey didn't really happen until 2020. And, as we all know, the world shut down. But a friend of mine that I had met through ministry that God was incorporating into my life, I met her at a conference in 2018. She actually started a podcasting group of like a media group of people, encouraging people to take that next step in getting your voice out. So it was really her, the opportunity where everything just shut down and now everything was going to happen within our homes. I had God absolutely ignited this sparked message of saying, get out there and share what you learned about anxiety to the world through a podcast. So that's it in a nutshell.
It's awesome. Awesome. And so there's a few things that you mentioned that I really want to dive into a little bit more. And this is in no particular order, and I hope I don't get us off on a rabbit trail here, but talk about a little bit. You mentioned, and I'm kind of, reading between lines here. It's basically a partnership, like dealing with anxiety, or I guess you could even say anything in life almost is a partnership between you and what you can do. And then giving God the other part of it. Yeah. So you're like kind of going in this together. And so you found some things that you could do to combat anxiety. And can you talk a little bit about give us some ideas for that? Because and just describe anxiety for people someone who either has feelings, they don't know how to kind of capture the right sense. Like how do they know if they have anxiety? And then for somebody who doesn't know what that is and who doesn't suffer from that, like, can you give us a little bit of a description of what that is?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. What I say about anxiety versus depression, just because I think sometimes people can sometimes relate more to depression than anxiety is. Anxiety is the fear of dying, and depression tends to be the fear of living. And then there's obviously so many more components to both of that. But with anxiety, it's when let me give you a sticky statement because maybe it'll help me to narrow in what anxiety is. Peace is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of God. Peace is something that I think we all want to live in. And that is not necessarily, I know we can get we don't want to go in a rabbit hole of world peace, but that is a contributing part of it, but just a general peace in our hearts where we can wake up and say, okay, these are the things I'm going to do today. You know, I'm going to go to my job, or I'm a stay-at-home mom, or I'm working on whatever. And I don't want anything to interfere with that. And interfering with that anxiety means that you're outside of that place of calmness and I can get all guru about it, but it's like that centering of knowing that these weird feelings of fear and worry and doubt and you know, your body reacting are not going to overpower that general way of walking through your life in that peaceful place. And the thing about anxiety that I found is that those normal feelings of worry, doubt, fear, and all of those, you know, anxiety, fundamentals of anxiety happen. It's the way that you have that ability to be able to know in advance how they're what could possibly trigger anxiety and sort of get ahead of it in your life. So, you know, there's the medical definition of anxiety in general. It's just really not living in a place of peace and calm. But what I try to preach to and what I've learned is that you can really get ahead of it by just using practical measures. Jason, you're into fitness. Fitness is huge in the anxiety world. And, you know, you do it at a level of extreme because, you know, you're a bodybuilder and you know, but you also know what an endorphin feels like, right? You know that when you're having a bad day and maybe you didn't apply your physical that day, that maybe you'll feel lesser in a place of calmness and more in a place of anxiousness. Well, I'm someone who preaches to how the spirit, the soul, and the body, and I'll take what the guru secular world tries to teach, which is mind, body, spirit, and shift it, because I believe that I'm a believer in Christ. So you have to start with the spirit of Christ and God, and then is through the spirit, and then through the soul, he ignites that kind of empowerment to apply all these practical measures into our world. And therefore now we're into this to the body part of it, which is I have to make sure that if I deal with anxiety, I can't overdo coffee or any kind of drink that's like a, you know, like one of those caffeinated drinks like that, because I know that anxiety is something that I deal with. And so if I want to stay in a place of calm, I have to be responsible of the foods that I put into my body, the drinks that I put into my body. The same goes with alcohol. I love a glass of wine or two, but I understand that if I overdrink, it's going to make me feel good in those moments, but it's going to make me feel even worse the next day, you know? And then I also understand that yoga and ways of centering the anxiety into a place of calm and peace and stretching your body and doing all this. I'm not a fan of yoga, but I think it's fantastic for people that suffer from anxiety. I, on the other hand, love high impact. I hate going to the gym, but I know that when I give my body that hour of respect and work through it, I'm at this incredible, like endorphin, like place of bliss because I gave my body what it needed. So, you know, it's all of those things that I have to it's a planning in place every single day. But in the beginning of it, I said earlier about the spirit, soul, and body, I have to start with my faith in God first. And then all of that other goodness comes if I respect the vessel he gave me and maintain that by doing the right things for my body to eliminate the anxiety.
And so talk about, you know, as you're talking, so I'm hearing there's a very physical component to this as well. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
There also seems like to be a significant mental portion to it as well. Like, and so is it true that someone with anxiety, is there any relation to, like, you know, being like, for instance, I have some people that are close to me that are, anxiety prone, let's just say. And in some of these people, I've noticed patterns, like they just overthink everything. And everything's a worst case scenario. Is that common, or is that particular to these cases I'm talking about?
No, that's 100% common. And I'll tell you why. It's really the shifting of the mind, right? You know, God tells us in scripture, he says, do not conform to the ways of the world, but transform your thinking into me. And all of that, I think, applies to everything from every little detail of our life. Like I'm very visual. Okay. So I speak to the physical component of life. You have to really honor the body that God gave you, take care of it, treat it well. But I'm very visual too. Like if I'm waking up to a black room that's got red and orange and just ways that are like taking what is non-peaceful we'll say from a visual secular world and turning it into a very anxious, crazy, I'm going to incorporate that into my mind. That has to do with social media as well. It has to do with television. It has to do with music. If I'm going to listen to some heavy metal, crazy, music, that's going to bring me to a different state. If I'm going to listen to something calming like symphonic music or jazz or piano, that brings me to a different kind of state. And it's all of what we put in front of us. And that has to do also with our relationships. If we're in a toxic relationship, that's going to cause anxiety. Any kind of toxicity and things that we watch on television, things that we allow in our worlds, it's going to encourage or discourage the anxiety that we live with every day. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So it's very mental, and you can help control that a lot.
That's
so how you do that though.
Well, it's like the gray area question of the world here. How do we do that if we have toxic relationships, or, what I always try to speak to in my podcast and in my world, control what you can, right? I mean, if you're in a toxic relationship, you can control that. You don't have to live in a relationship with someone else that is encouraging negativity, discourse, stealing your joy. I always say that. I say that to people around the holidays, especially as you can see behind me on the Zoom call. I know our listeners can't, but I love Christmas. And so I'm going to work hard to make sure that beauty is around me, and people are going to try to steal that joy from me, saying it's a waste of my time, but I know where to find that joy because I seek it out. So, if you're we could certainly go on a rabbit hole conversation about marriages and relationships with mothers, fathers, children, siblings, whatever. If they're toxic, scripture doesn't say stay in a toxic relationship. He says, pray for it, but eliminate it if it's causing your anxiety to ignite on a daily basis. So you can control it by not engaging in it. And I know that's a heavy statement.
There's a heavy statement, because I find this a lot as far as my coaching. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but my question thing is, from what I see, does that mean that a lot of the anxiety comes from seeking that control on, certain things in life? And, you're looking from that perspective of like having the certainty, right? This is not happening. That's not happening. And trying to have that certainty that's creating that control, right? And how do you actually, is it about controlling it? Is it about letting go of the control? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And I don't know the ultimate answer to it, because we are so influenced by the world and what we can and cannot control. And I, as a believer in Christ, I know that there are things that I think are expectations on earth that we can control, but ultimately we lift up that control to God, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the problem too is that I speak to this a lot. You have to understand that you have anxiety, and you have to learn how to control your anxiety. I know a lot of people that live in it and as a safety mechanism. In other words, they're always living in anxiety because that's what they know well, and they don't want to get in and they don't want to fix it. And I know that sounds like it's kind of like, well, isn't God there to fix it for you? Well, yeah, but he also gives us thoughts. He gives us actions. He gives us a world where we can seek out healing. So, there's so many people that just want to live in mental illness and not prosper outside of it because they think that they're safer in it. And I think you can apply that even to the exercise world. Jason, this as someone who works in the field of body respecting your body. That you're not going to get that muscle and that strength if you don't go out to the gym and work for it. And I believe that God gives us a physical muscle that we can ignite. But let's start with the spiritual muscle first. Are we activating the spiritual muscle of who he is in our hearts and our soul? Are we getting into his word? Are we understanding the intent of how we actually are to live this life? And then once we gain that spiritual muscle, which is not that hard to do, people, I'm in Bible studies 3 times a week. I'm learning the word so I can ignite that spiritual muscle first and foremost. And from there, he helps me to ignite the mental muscle of the soul, like understanding that, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to listen to heavy metal music if I'm prone to anxiety. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I just know it doesn't bring me to a happy state. So I'm going to try to listen to something that makes me happy. I know that I need to go off social media on occasion because it doesn't bring me to a happy state. There's a lot of empathetic overload that's going on in this world. And I know that empathetic overload causes anxiety in my heart. If I'm not praying enough for people, if I'm not, and that's who I am. I have to own who Jodi is and know that I can only manage so much because I have anxiety, and that goes with what you see on television and which is visually in front of you. And in terms of the relational part of it with people, like, I've been in relationships, Peter, with people that are constantly negative about every little thing. And that draws me in sometimes to being negative. And I know that negativity doesn't help my drive in life. So I don't think there's anything wrong with, pushing yourself away a little from people that are negative and trying to bring you down, because it's not helpful. It's not a helpful kind of way to live when you're dealing with anxiety.
Sounds to me like, Wojo, you want to say something, so maybe I'll let you say something. I don't know.
Well, I was just going to say, Jodi, I heard as I'm listening and learning a few things. Like, one is perhaps, there's real, what I'm thinking of, and there's 4 things in my mind that are kind of combining here to give anybody a strategy to overcome anxiety or deal with anxiety, to eradicate anxiety, whatever you're trying to do. But one is like, it's the mindset involved in how you view things that are happening, how you perceive things, the way you think about them. Like, so you can, it might even be something that is a normal thing that happens, that somehow the way you view it, the way you focus on it, can lead to an anxiety provoking response. Number 2, I'm hearing that it's using your physical body, because of the relationship between the way you think and your body, the physicality, moving, blood flow, endorphins. That's number 2. Number 3 is your environment, like taking specific steps to reduce things that on a customized level. And I think that this kind of encapsulates all 3 of these, like knowing yourself and knowing what is a trigger for you. And there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong. It's just, this is the way it is for me. So I'm going to do my thing to make sure that I reduce those kind of negative influences or things that may be a spark for an anxiety attack for me. And then surrounding those 3 things, I think I feel like it's a big bubble or big cloud around this. And that's God, like who's orchestrating and helping and directing and encouraging, but also is there, quite frankly, encapsulating the whole thing, right? So that's kind of the outer layer of all of it that is directed inward.
Well, one of the things I never wanted to ever, I don't want my listeners to ever think that I say just pray it away.
Yeah.
Because as someone who has, I think, a bit of common sense, right? I associate trying to help people understand how you can feel healing and fulfillment and peace is by the practical measures alongside the big bubble of who Christ and God is in our world, right? In scripture, he says, do not be anxious about anything. He means that, but in everything, in gratitude, give your request to God, and then that's where you start to see the progress of your life. That's one of my favorite scriptures in Philippians. Jason, if I'm someone who's overweight, and let's put aside the fact that there could be a medical reason why, right? Mm-hmm. Which there also is solutions to that as well. If I'm overweight and I want to get in shape, if I want to run a marathon, let's go there. If I want to run a marathon, I'm going to do a 10K. I can't wake up and I have not ran ever, really. I'm in a significant amount of shape where I can run. So let's just say I don't have a disability. I'm not going to go and try to run that marathon tomorrow. I have to work up to building up the endurance, the agility, and then having the resilience to how my body is going to react to be able to run a marathon. And that takes work and effort on my part. And I think that life is a general marathon, right? Life is hard. It is, but how are you building up the endurance to, hold up the strength to the hard world? Are you recognizing you have anxiety? Are you giving yourself the respect that is your problematic part of your world, but it shouldn't be leading your world. It shouldn't be, directing your world. There's ways to work around it.
Yeah. Well, what I also hear is you're not going to show up. You're not going to pray the night before a marathon, having not done any training and saying, God, please give me the strength to get through this marathon. Like that would just be insanity, right? Like,
right. So, it would be just like anything else. He wants you to do the work, but then he's going to show up for the progress. He just wants you to do the work. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand with anxiety. There is some work you can be doing, but he shows up with the ultimate progression, which is peace.
And I think, and I love that, because I think the part of that work that we have to do is where we actually develop ourselves into being the person who can handle what is in front of us, kind of thing, right? Yeah. So that is an important step. And I think a lot of people try to skip it. In whether it's work, whether it's job, whether it's relationships, right? They try to skip this step somehow because instant gratification. How fast can I get this, right?
Right.
Get my marriage work right now. Well, your marriage hasn't worked for years. You want to just fix it right now, right? Or get my body right now, or something like that. So there is that work where you have to become certain person in order for that thing to actually work. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, you think about someone who's had a bad injury. And there may be medications that can help heal the process of the pain that maybe they had a surgery or whatnot. And there's medications, but what is typically the next step? Physical therapy, right? Or some form of therapy, because you still have to therapeutically get to that place of pure healing. And I try to apply that in the spiritual mechanism of life, which I think corresponds well with anxiety. Okay. So you discovered you have anxiety. You realize that every day you're waking up and you're worrying about everything. You're doubting everything. You're in fear. You're having panic attacks. Well, what is the first thing I suggest you do? I always say, go to a doctor, number one, because you need to rule out every real reason why you could potentially be having it. It could be thyroid related. It could be heart related. There's many physical components to why you could have anxiety that may not necessarily mean that you have a general anxiety disorder, which is what I experienced and what I lived through, right? Because it wasn't anything else. Nothing else was the problem. It wasn't a thyroid. It wasn't all of those other diabetes. It wasn't anything like that. Once you get to that point where you've sat down with a doctor and he has given you a full workup, my next set of advice is, okay, so you do have anxiety. So now what's the next thing? Well, I'm using, I love how you said that, Jason, the bubble of God, the bubble, he's going to need to surround this whole thing, because the secular world isn't really going to help you too far. But the next thing you can do is start working on your physical health, right? Which we talked about in this podcast already, and applying practical measures. What's practicality? You know, you have anxiety, you know, it's something you have to deal with every day. So as we talked about earlier, try to eliminate those elements that can help instigate it. A great example I use in terms of understanding anxiety and being prepared for it is I deal with fear, tremendous fear of flying. I mean, we're talking like for years, I would use the substance of alcohol to get through that. And I realized that does not work, by the way. So I speak to that a lot.
Right, now you just throw up on the flight.
And it actually, not only does it make you sicker, it actually, when you're up in the air, and I know this because I interviewed a pilot. So if anybody wants to listen to that episode, it was one of my favorite episodes, because I finally got to a point where I was like, by the way, getting back to what I was saying, alcohol actually instigates. It does not work as much up in the air when you're 30,000 feet as it does on the earth at a bar. So just FYI, but listen to that podcast. It was helpful. But I used to do that. And then I had to, I got to a point where I was just not going anywhere because I was afraid to fly. Mm-hmm. And so this past year, 2020, wait, where are we? 2021. I ended up going to Florida, first time flying and in a long time. And I have my faith and I got the Lord, right? But even, I'll tell you why that wasn't enough. I couldn't just pray it away, because it was something that I had to deal with in terms of shifting my mind to understanding what aviation is about, what flying is about, what is the reality of what is going on during those panic attacks and fear of flying. So I flew, I did what I had to do. And when I say I do what I have to do, I don't drink coffee in the morning. I get on that plane. I have to have a window seat. I do take a medication, but all of those things I was doing was not helping 100% getting me to not going to that place of fear. I did all those things. I went to Florida. I went into full panic attack and anxiety mode while I was in Florida, trying to have a good time with some sisters in Christ. It was a podcast retreat. I went into full blown fear and flew back home, landed in Raleigh, Durham. And God said to me, you need to interview a pilot. I'm like, what are you talking about, God? He's like, no, this is it. Enough of this crap. I got work for you to do, and you cannot let this flying hold you back. So I seeked out a pilot, had a great conversation with him. And what I did was I learned about the actual fundamentals of flying. What is going on? And he was so helpful because he helped teach me turbulence. He helped teach me all of the things that are going on from departure to landing to all of those things. And he helped me to understand that, in fact, flying is the safest form of travel. If you use the common sense mentality of understanding that, we all know that when a plane crashes, we're going to hear about it, right? There's been how many this year versus automobile accidents, train accidents, bus accidents, health accidents, right? So at the end of the day, his common sense was infused into my heart into my heart to say, Jodi, you got this. At the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do to get up on that airplane, and the rest is up to God. Does that make sense? Like, I had to do the work to understand the fear. And
also let me take that. I see that and that's powerful. And I also want to dive into something there that what I heard is that you sought out an intellectual understanding of the situation that was provoking anxiety. And then once you had more information and felt at ease and understood air fluid dynamics and how the plane flies and propulsion, that is it true that am I understanding this correctly, that once you understood how this actually works, you felt more at ease with that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Learn about it.
Yes. It was just the common sense of it. Yeah.
So what is it? So this is something that's really interesting to me, because I think there's a difference in a lot of people between intellectual understanding and then real life emotional acceptance. So let's say, for instance, and I've seen these pictures of like these transparent glass bridges that are thousands of feet in the air, and some people are like, no way, I'm not walking across it. And other people will. Intellectually, you're safe. You're safe on a bridge, but the emotional acceptance of that intellectual understanding, there seems to be a disconnect. So how were you successful in taking that understanding and then accepting that internally? And it's not just head knowledge, because we all have head knowledge on things that we know is ridiculous and we shouldn't be like, gosh, there's no need for me to be afraid of this or worry about that, but we do. So how are you successful? Because that's a huge lesson, I think, if we could figure that out, or if you could figure that out. I don't know if you ever thought about that.
I've the funny part about that is, like, on occasion I like to go and watch those reels where you see all those crazy people doing those crazy things. And, right. In those incredible countries with, what I mean? Like the bridges that look like one wrong move. Right. Or I see those, I don't know if you ever saw those reels where those people, like there's some gold hand in China that literally looks like it's coming out of a mountain, and people walk up it and they want a picture of it. And anything like that, skydiving, you name it. I just know that I have my own level of fears that I can control, in terms of, I don't have to do that. So I'm not going to do that, because I know that I couldn't do it. So don't do it. But flying was something, I don't know. It's a good question, Jason. And it really is a brain teaser.
Well, yeah, you may never have thought about it before. I'm just curious.
I just know that I don't do what I don't have to do, because I know it's going to cause anxiety. I don't have to do crazy things like walk on a glass bridge, because I know that my body and emotions can't handle that. It's too fear factor for me. And so I just avoid it. But it came down to, like, certain things in life you just can't avoid. Like, and that's such a big question, because some people can say, like, well, you're letting your fear overtake, right? Why are you letting your fear overtake? Well, where is it on earth that I have to do certain things like that? Right. I mean, right now, I believe that there's like a common sense practicality of life. I need to wake up. I've chosen to be a wife and a mother. I have to wake up. I have to be a wife. I have to be a mom. I have to take care of my home. I have to get in a car and drive to the grocery store. And I don't have to fly. And I know tons of people that choose not to fly at all. But I feel like God has sparked a ministry in me. So at some point he's going to say, I need you to go to California, and driving there is no easy task. So I have to apply common sense and say, I need to get up on a plane and fly there. However, there's other things like I don't have to do and that I can control, because I know my anxiety can overpower that. and it's just not worth instigating it. Does that make sense? Because I feel like you're going to make me think about this hours and days after.
Go, Wojo.
Listen,
we need a part two because I got to really figure this one out.
Well, and what I also heard though is like, hey, you also had a big enough reason combined with the intellectual understanding to kind of really give you some traction in overcoming this, because if you have a message that you're supposed to share and it's from God and he wants you to share it and you need to go to California, then you have a reason to overcome that. It's one of the things that you want to do. And so there's got to be something in there that's also powerful. I just found it really interesting, and I think, I've seen people, I know people that are afraid to drive, like they won't drive. And and the road is every day is a risky place.
Yeah.
But there's also a big cost to not driving, and it's a whole lot more inconvenient. And maybe you can adjust your life so you don't have to drive, and that's possible, especially in today's age, but it just seems like there are so many things that we could be afraid of if we chose to. Like it could be super daunting for someone. And it's just so interesting to see the different, so maybe someone will drive, you could see someone that will jump out of a plane with no problem, but they're afraid to drive, or someone who will, you know what I mean? Like everybody has.
Yeah. That's to me, like, well, too, like I wanted to bring up a big part of anxiety is social anxiety. So there are people that won't leave their homes, and it's debilitating. Okay. And, I again, going back to like your first part of this question, which is really intriguing me. There's certain things that I just think we are supposed to do as human beings. We'll go to a mortal human being. We're supposed to get up, wake up, and live a life, whatever that looks like for each person. Right. And so to go and walk a glass bridge might not be for everybody's life. And a necessary component to some people, it might be a fear they want to fight, or they want to be able to say it, or they want to put a reel on TikTok, and that's a part of their journey. But I think that there's practical things like if you're waking up every day in constant fear of just life in general, that is a debilitating life that you are leading. And I, number one, certainly pray for you, and I discourage you even living in that and getting out and seeking help, whatever that looks like, from a doctor or a therapist, medicine, whatever you need to do, because that's a real thing. But in terms of things that we can and cannot control, like I can control not walking, jumping out of an airplane, but I may not be able to control not getting up in one in order to do what God has served. And he will show up, and he is faithful, and he will give me what I need in that faithful relationship. He will show me that I needed, like I said, to interview a pilot to sort of eliminate that level of fear that was debilitating my life, because it was debilitating. There'd be times where my husband's like, let's go on this trip. And I would say no, because I didn't want to fly. And there was no other way to get to the Caribbean, unless I might take a boat, and that would take forever. But, I think it's just my ministry speaks to a lot of just applying common sense to life and understanding it. And it can, going back into the Bible and scripture and what God says, and just applying that into living a better life, eliminating it.
So Jodi, where do people learn more about you, your podcast, what you're doing, and want to follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm on every podcast format, like I assume you guys are as well. And my website is www.jodihowe.com. And I have all of my podcasts and information there. And I'm on social media formats. I've got social media on, I don't really get to Twitter much, but Facebook and Instagram are also great platforms that you can find me at. And, just doing what God has asked me to do. And that is to share hope through, healing through anxiety, and, not living in that place of fear, and living in a place of peace, and even when problems exist.
Yes. And repeat the name of your podcast again for everyone.
It's the Air That I Breathe podcast.
Air That I Breathe. Awesome. Jodi, thank you so much for being on the show. We've really enjoyed it.
I've had a great conversation with both you and Peter. Thank you guys for your time, and I wish you all well.
All right, man. Well, listen, gosh, I don't have a lot of general anxiety experience. Personally, I've seen it with other people around me, but I think I got some really good tips from Jodi in this episode. And one of the things that I really liked about it is you talked about this partnership of the things you can do, and then there's God too, right? So it's you're working together. It's just like, I love the illustration she said about the marathon, right? And like you can't just not train and then show up the day before and say, God, please help me. Like that doesn't make any sense. It's a partnership.
Right. And then I think in that point is when you are going through that work, we talked about that, right? It's there for a reason. There's a purpose to that, to develop you in a certain way, to be able to run a marathon, to be able to, how do I, work with anxiety or depression and things like that, right? So that part is important. You can't skip that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point. The partnership was really good. The other thing that I got out of this particular podcast is, which I think is an underlying thing. You mentioned at one point those 3 different areas, right? The mental, the physical, the environment, that kind of stuff. And I think what's important in that area is knowing yourself. Like you brought it up, know thyself, like who you really are. Know yourself to be able to go. And because I think when a lot of people have this skewed view of who they really are, and when they start learning about themselves, really learning about themselves, who they really are, I think that helps a lot in that area of life.
Dude, that's huge because, in so many different parts. Like, so for instance, you hear, for instance, okay, yoga is great for anxiety, but Jodi said this, she's like, I don't really like yoga. So I do HIIT stuff. I do high intensity stuff. So knowing what you're going to do, knowing what's a trigger for you, is it huge crowds? Is it a bunch of people? Like you may not want to, buy floor seats at a hard rock concert, if that's going to be a trigger for you. Now, we didn't talk about this, man, but I'm also curious, we did mention at the end how Jodi said, basically, there's certain things that I kind of don't have to do. Like it's not part of my life and I can avoid those things. And we didn't talk about this, and I kind of have a split feeling on this because part of me is like, well, yes, you don't have to do it, but if you overcame this thing, or if you got more comfortable with it, would allow you to do all these other things? Like, would that training or that development or that growth allow you to do other things that previously were anxiety provoking, but now are not? So I guess you got to, but it gets back to what you said, like knowing yourself. So like, and we talk about this and we stole this from behavioral psychologists who use this kind of inoculation technique to overcome fears so you're afraid of a snake. Okay, well, here's a caterpillar, right? And get comfortable with the caterpillar first. And so there's probably some version of that process that you could do with anxiety provoking activities or things as well. But what do you think about that, man? Like, cause I mean, you don't want to live in a bubble, but at the same time, you don't want to trigger yourself either.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not an easy conversation to have, but what I think is important here is like step 1 is knowing yourself. Yeah. And then step 2 in life, and we're talking about your vision, right? What is the vision that you have that you want to get to? Yeah. And if that is preventing you from getting to that vision, then that's something that you're going to have to deal with, I think, in order to be able to, because if jumping out of the plane is preventing you from living that vision, I'm using that as an example, right? I'm not saying that is the case. Yeah, but it could be something like that. Sure. And you're going to have to address that in some shape or form. Yeah. Either you're going to cross it off the vision or you're going to figure out a way to overcome it. Right. And so that's really interesting, man. And it does get back to knowing yourself. The other thing I'll say is, man, there's been more anxiety, I think, in the last couple of years than perhaps any period in human history, barring maybe a couple of major events that were much, much shorter in duration. And so I think learning how to deal with this is tremendously valuable. And the thing that we didn't talk about here, but your anxiety not only affects you, but it affects all the other people around you too. And so your ability to parent to the best of your skills and to be a spouse or a brother or sister or coworker or whatever, friend, all of it's influenced by the anxiety. And so I think this is something to face head on. Certainly there's no shame or embarrassment or judgment about it. You just got to kind of just realize this, you're struggling with this, and then find the appropriate help and take the appropriate measures all the time, realizing that at the end of the day, God's in control and taking solace in that, and really putting your faith and your heart into that. All right. The other thing that you brought up, and I think was an underlying message in this podcast, is stop resisting it, stop avoiding it, stop pushing it away, right? Because I think a lot of people are doing that, and that makes it even bigger. We talk about the fear. She talked about fear a little bit in there, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
When you resist it, when you try to, push it away, ignore it, whatever, guess what? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Yeah. So I think, when you start addressing it and looking at it, all of a sudden, like she did with the flying, she started looking at it, right? Learning about it, getting to know it. And all of a sudden that fear and that started to shrink smaller, and allowed her to get on a plane and fly to Florida, come back. And, that was awesome.
That was a very, very interesting discussion that I wish I had more time to explore, but that intellectual versus emotional kind of like continuum there, what that looks like. Super, super interesting episode. Really enjoyed speaking with her. And if you want to learn more about what she's doing, just find her on social media or go check out her podcast. Really, really, really cool stuff going on. Well, listen, hope you enjoyed this episode as well. Come find us on the Life in Air app. It's free. We're in there. It's just go to lifeinair.com. You can download it for free on your Android or iPhone device. Be part of the conversations, ask questions. You can respond to other Life in Airs, find out what, people are all pursuing their vision. Love seeing other people come in there and just come alongside you. And if you're struggling with something, like, let us help you. Let us ask a question, chime in, get encouraged, get supported, because that's what it's all about. Also, we would love it if you could leave us, just take 1 minute out of your day right now before you even pause us right now and then go leave us an episode and come back and finish the last 30 seconds. It's that important. As you leave us a review, this isn't because this is for no other purpose, but it really helps other people find us and see that this is something that can help them as well. And like, the more we're on a mission here to change lives, and you're part of that when you rate us and help other people find us. So until next week, we'll see you next time, everybody. Take care and God bless.